Well, hello everyone. Welcome. I'm Allison, and today my guest is Emily Lewis of Mindfulness with Emily. She helps individuals reduce stress. We all need a little bit more of that right now, I think. Get unstuck and wake up to their lives using mindfulness meditation. I love this. She is a mindfulness teacher and holds a Master of Science, I think, in mindfulness based interventions from the University College Dublin, which is very cool. So, welcome, Emily, and I'm really looking forward to chatting more with you about mindfulness today.
Oh, I'm excited. Thanks for having me.
So as we dive in, the very first thing I want to talk about with you is sort of your personal story, and just tell me a little bit more about your life and kind of what brought you into doing this work. How did this come
Yeah.
about?
Ooh, I love it. Thanks. Yeah. So I was doing a psychology degree at MUN, and I did a course. It was called the non-duality of body and mind. Okay. And I kind of discovered all the research around mindfulness, meditation practice, and how we can like change the shape of our brains in 8 weeks. And I was like, oh my God, this is the answer to all of our suffering. We'll all just meditate and everything's going to be amazing, which is like not untrue, but like a little bit excitedly naive, and kind of started cultivating my own mindfulness practice. And this was, I guess, in 2014, and kind of started seeing all my own kind of habits and patterns, and the ways in which I was really stuck without even knowing that I was stuck and that there was a way to be maybe a bit less stuck. And so from there, it kind of became a path of healing, to be honest. And I ended up then, going to Dublin to do this master's in mindfulness-based interventions in psychology. And so now I'm, teaching mindfulness as a therapeutic tool for stress, anxiety, insomnia. Yeah. So that's kind of that's the path now back in Newfoundland. And just started this business and working with all different kinds of people and different, I want to say different populations. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think it's become so apparent over the last couple of years, just, how stressed so many of us are, including myself, right? And that it's something that we have to sort of continuously work on. So I'm really curious. I feel like one of the first things that people might ask, I'm sure you probably hear something along these lines all the time. When we say mindfulness, what are we really actually talking about? And what would you say to people who are like, that's a very woo-woo kind of a thing? How do we break that down and help everyone understand what exactly are we talking about when we say mindfulness? Because it's such a popular word. It's like, ooh, mindfulness, excellent. Well, tell us more about that.
Absolutely. And so this is really, really important, right? Because there's a lot of misconceptions about what it is as well. And it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people in a lot of different fields. So I really like to kind of even start with what it's not, right? For the purposes of what I teach anyway, it's not actually about clearing our minds and getting rid of all our thoughts. Okay. People think that I'm supposed to meditate and be able to clear my mind, and then they can't, because that's actually impossible. And then they think, oh, I'm not good at it. It's not for me. That's, something that other people are able to do that I'm not able to do. And that's just because they're following this misconception that that's what you're supposed to do. Like, minds think, that's what minds do. Okay. And so what we're doing is simply noticing when we're thinking, right? And actually kind of changing our relationships to our thinking. It's also not necessarily about like zenning out and relaxing. We can relax in mindfulness, sure, but sometimes we notice when we do a meditation practice, for example, that we're stressed to pieces. And like, if that's what we're noticing, that's what we're noticing. That's mindfulness. And of course, it's also not like this fix all pill or something as well. We're not going to meditate away, really like genuine problems and suffering that are happening. Like we're not going to meditate away COVID or something, so just to catch maybe what oftentimes people think it might be, and then kind of get upset when it's not, and so what it is, it's really simply just paying attention to what's going on for us in any given moment, right? So being aware of, what's going on in my inner world. So what emotions or moods are here, what sensations are here in my body, what's the maybe flavor of my mind if I'm being really critical or if I'm quite calm, and also noticing what's going on kind of in our outer world as well. Oftentimes we kind of use our senses to explore, for example, just having the coffee, can I feel the heat of it in my hands, for example. And so, yes, really simply put, noticing what's going on in our experience with curiosity and kindness, and then choosing our behavior. So kind of stepping out of this reactivity as well as another piece of mindfulness.
That's amazing. I think that's such a great way of describing it. I know for me, I've always sort of called myself an overthinker. My brain is always going at what I call maybe like Mach 10. And it's so difficult. Like the thought of me, thinking about not having anything going on there at any given time, it's just wild concept. So thank you for kind of explaining that to us. I also love the mug, that if you can just put your hands on something tangible and feel it and just kind of be there. One of the reasons why I find this concept so interesting is, and it's partly because it's something that I've worked on for myself over the last few years, is that I think a lot of us are sort of just go, 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 right? We're just one thing onto the next thing, onto the next thing, and we're not really taking the time to even slow down and take a breath. And it's something that, I don't know if you believe this, but I believe, we have to continually work on these skills in our day to day, right? So for example, I don't mind sharing, because anyone who already follows me knows that I'm really open about myself. Today is a stressful day for me, okay? I'm actually feeling quite stressed, but I'm very happy to be here with you. And, a lot of us don't take that minute in our days because there's always something else. I have to be here. I have to do this. I have to get to the next thing. We're not taking those moments to see, feel, think, be.
Yeah.
So can you share with us a little bit more about what's kind of happening in our brains, in our bodies, when we're going through periods of stress or overwhelm, which could be every day for a lot of us?
Absolutely, it is. Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to speak about it just briefly from, from almost a neuroscience perspective, but just really briefly, just to give a bit of preface, and this I think kind of comes back to the woo-woo-ness that you spoke of, that I meant to actually speak more of. This is science, okay? This is, this practice, although based in traditional, maybe Buddhist lineages, it's for the purposes of what I teach anyway, is secular, is based in psychology and neuroscience. So just to kind of name that as well. And so to speak briefly to stress then, we have this little organ in the back of our brain called the amygdala. And this is like one of the oldest parts of our brain next to our brainstem, okay? And this is the region where it actually controls our fight and flight response. So this is our, needing, kind of perceiving a stressful event and then making this split decision if I'm going to fight this predator, or to flee, and so what's happening when this is firing is that it's actually releasing adrenaline and cortisol throughout the body. Okay, so this is stress hormones. This is adrenaline allowing us to act really quickly. This is, we're having increased blood flow to our limbs, literally, so we can run fast, decrease blood flow to our digestive system because we don't need that in a moment of panic. And so that's kind of the aspect of the brain and the body. And this was like really awesome when we were, now bear with this example, but running from a lion. like we needed this, right? From an evolutionary perspective, we need to be able to run quickly, or to fight. And that's really, really important. But the problem is that, our society has evolved to a place now where there isn't a lion, and the lion is now a deadline, or trying to get the kids, to school, or trying to do whatever the kind of our stresses are of today's society. And so what ends up happening is that we don't actually get to exert any of this energy that's in the body, which would allow us to kind of expel it. Almost reminding me of like a dog shakes to get rid of the kind of energy. I'm not saying we should all go around shaking, but we don't burn off the energy properly, and we end up staying quite stuck in this realm of fight or flight response. Which, so acute stress, not a problem. Prolonged stress chronically is a problem, where this is how we get sick. This is where we see, heart disease. This is where we see anxiety, depression. This is where we see addiction issues, because we're trying to down-regulate all this activation that we have in the body. Yeah, does that make sense what I'm saying there?
Absolutely does. I love it. And I think this is going to lead really well into my next question, but I think it's important for us all to be aware that all of these things are happening in our body, whether we realize it or not. And yeah, it's really important. My whole thing is mental well-being, but it's so important for our wellness and our well-being to, as the first step, be aware, right? Our stress, our overwhelm is having an impact on us physically and mentally. Yeah, it's so important.
And it's not our fault. Like, this is how we're built. This is how the body is built to be, and the mind is built to be, so that we can take care of ourselves, so that we can run away from danger, so that we can fight. And that's not a problem. We need that. Like, we need stress to know when to take our hand off the hot burner. Like, we need quick reactions. But the problem is that, we're not built to live in that realm. The body's not built to be constantly in that mode. And this is where, mindfulness comes in as a way to actually down-regulate that response.
I love that. So now that we're learning a little bit more about mindfulness, what it isn't, what it is, how it helps us and our bodies, tell me, so you are a mindfulness instructor. You teach, I know, a few different types of mindfulness programs. So what does someone learn if they learn or take a mindfulness program? What does that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So the classes themselves are kind of three-parters, right? So we learn various different kinds of meditation practices. Then there's a kind of group discussion component where we explore what we noticed in the practices. And then there's a psychoeducational component, and this is the kind of psychological framework for understanding what's happening, like I was just speaking about stress, for example. And so the training programs take course over, X amount of weeks, normally 8 weeks. And we really start with, each week having a theme, and we start with the first theme, for example, is this like automatic pilot mode. Okay, so we already spoke to this a little bit, but it's like, do you ever drive home from work or from school and you just end up in the driveway and you're like, cool, how did I get here? Where was I? Did I run a stop sign? I hope not, but really just noticing how often we're not here because we're like these floating heads, nearly just thinking about, supper and what's the next thing, or reflecting on what happened earlier. And again, not our fault. That's just how minds work, but just noticing how often we're not here and where we are when we're not. And then from there, we're kind of looking at, our habits and patterns of mind, looking at the obstacles to meditation practice, and learning how to actually cultivate a daily meditation practice. And then once we've cultivated the capacity to practice meditation daily, even if it's 10 or 15 minutes, for example, we start looking at, how do I use this tool now in the midst of life? Okay, taking it kind of from the cushion, for example, to in the middle of our stressful lives. So we look at, like we just spoke about, the evolutionary function of stress, what happens in the body. And then we start looking at, okay, how can I use this in the face of difficulty? How can I use this tool that I've just cultivated to downregulate myself when stress is happening, and to catch myself in my reactions and to do something differently? And then the latter weeks of course, might look something like looking at mindful communication, mindfulness in relationships, mindfulness in work, taking care of ourselves. And so the process of a mindfulness program is really, it's a training program, starting with just noticing how often we're not here, and then kind of building this toolbox of how we might actually use these practices in the overwhelm that is our current lives. Yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, and I'm actually going to ask an add-on piece if that's okay. So,
Yeah.
spoken a lot about like the meditation piece, the thinking piece. Is how we breathe incorporated into this as well?
Absolutely. Yeah, we work with the breath and meditation practice for sure. And that really just, that looks like actually just feeling the sensations of breathing, right? Feeling the expansion and contraction of the breath. And, then of course we notice that the mind goes off to something else, as minds do. I'm planning for something else. I'm reflecting on something that happened yesterday. I'm thinking about that ex-girlfriend from 2006 for no reason, whatever it is we do, right? And we just, cool, no big deal. We come back again and again to the breath, or to the feet on the floor, to something that's happening in the present moment, so that what we're doing is we're actually training our capacity to focus on something else, so that the mind can be going off, blah, 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 blah. And like, we're like, cool mind, but right now we're feeling the breath, and it's no big deal. But each time we come back, we actually strengthen our capacity to pay attention to something other than our busyness of mind. And so the more we strengthen that capacity, the better we get at actually kind of moving out of our reactive mode and choosing kind of more responses outside the cushion. This is all about, it's not about being good meditators. It's about actually rewiring our brains so that when stuff is happening in our lives, we actually already have that neural pathway to be able to do something differently outside of our normal habitual ways of being.
Yeah. Okay, great. And part of the reason why I asked that question is because something that I noticed for myself is that when I feel sort of stressed, if I take a moment to notice, one of the things that I notice is that my breath feels very shallow, like you get that very, and
Mhm.
I have done some meditating. I do lots of yoga and stuff. So, I mean, I maybe have a bit more awareness of that than others, but it is something I notice, right? Like it gets very almost, it feels here, like it's this very shallow breathing. And it's interesting how just noticing that and being able to take some deeper breaths can actually really help with the calming, I guess. At least that's how it
Yeah,
feels to me.
absolutely.
Yeah.
No, you're so right. And I'm so glad you're bringing that in, because that is actually, speaking to the how of meditation practice. That's speaking to the, okay, so how do I down regulate my nervous system when it's on fire because we're all overwhelmed? And that's the how. That's okay. Can I feel my bum on the chair? Can I soften? We might notice our shoulders like tend to come up around our ears. Okay, can I intentionally notice that and soften it? Can I kind of notice the breath doing this and still kind of see how it is to maybe soften that contraction around the breath? And what that actually does is that's kind of moving us from this fight or flight response into a more soothing system, which actually allows us to down regulate this adrenaline and cortisol.
Okay. Amazing. I have one more question for you. I feel like we have maybe sort of touched on this a little bit, but I want to see if we can peel back a few more layers.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering about people who are maybe listening to this and they're thinking, okay, that sounds great, but my life is so busy. I have so much going on. I don't know how I would really um, start to incorporate this into my life. It feels like maybe just one more thing that I need to try to figure out or remember to do. So, what do you recommend? And of course, we don't want to give too much away, but what do you kind of recommend to people who have really busy lives? How do we sort of start incorporating this skill in once we've learned it, maybe?
Absolutely. I love that question because, it can be daunting, right? Like, okay, so now I have to do this, I have to do all this, like I have to go do my workout, then I have to have this formal meditation practice and all this. And it doesn't need to be that big of a thing. We can incorporate it into our daily lives where it doesn't need to be this extra thing on our to-do list. And that is actually where I would suggest people start, right? Because that's a little bit more tangible. And really, anything that we do, the core of that is then slowing down and pausing to notice what's actually going on. So this might be as simple as, pausing twice a day to take a breath and go, okay, what's actually going on for me? Like, what mood am I in? What's going on? How are my shoulders? Are they up around my ears? Can I just notice even what's going on for me in a given moment? So it doesn't need to be this big extra thing that takes lots of extra time. Maybe it's having the cup of tea, you know what I mean? Or the coffee in the morning. How do we normally drink the coffee in the morning, right? We pour it into our faces as quickly as possible. And like, I do too. Look, I'm not like, we're all in it together, right? But can I even just take the first 2 sips to feel it, in my hands? Or, Thich Nhat Hanh, who's a Buddhist monk actually of the Plum Village lineage, has a great kind of saying. And he says, if we only wash the cup of tea, not for the sake of washing it, right, but to get to the cup of tea that awaits us, that chances are by the time we get our cup of tea, we're going to be on to the next thing. And so we never actually get to have the cup of tea. We never get to actually appreciate, oh, this is actually pleasant for 1 second, and so it's all about, can I slow down enough for a moment just to maybe take a breath, or just to notice even the pleasantness that might be here, so that we can actually feel the pleasantness of something. I know it's silly, like the stop and smell the roses, but like, can we stop and smell the roses for a second before we go off again into our to-do list, which we also need, and not to make that bad, right? But
Yeah,
just small moments. Yeah.
To-do list is never ending, right? And I love that you just kind of brought that up here at the end about the fact that it's not just about sort of, I don't like to use the word fixing, but that's what's coming into my mind right now. But it's not just, sort of working on our stress, right? Because it's huge for that. But I love that you brought that in. It's about taking the time to enjoy the small pleasures that we have in life that many of us just breeze past because we have to like get to all these other things. I love that, Emily. Thank you so much. That was beautiful. So thank you so much for joining me. I know people are absolutely going to love listening to this. I'll have some show notes wherever I post this, but where can people find you if they want to learn more?
Absolutely. So my website is mindfulnesswithemily.com, and then Instagram, Facebook at Mindfulness with Emily. I'm always love to have the chats about this stuff. So like, really feeling free to reach out and ask any questions, or, if you want to inquire about any offerings or any of that, then really would love that.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And I look forward to chatting again at some point.
Yeah, me too. Thanks a million, Alison. It was so lovely.